No. Let me see. I've got these new glasses. I spend so much time on Zoom these days that I bought these glasses that are like, I copied Michael. They're blue light. What's it called? They protect you against blue light exposure. All right, guys, let's get going, because I know that our guests today have a lot to share with us and really looking forward to hear them. Today's Digital Life seminar, we have Robin Burjohn from the New York Times and Ido Sivansevilla, who is well known to all of us. And great to see everybody. It's really fantastic. We have new people who've come on board whose names I don't recognize, but we have a group of people who've been attending consistently. And as we always say, the Digital Life Seminar is as much about the people who show up and participate as it is about the speakers, because what we're trying to do with the Digital Life Seminar is generate and create a community of people who are very familiar and understand some of the ethics, policy, politics, and quality of life issues that are raised in digital societies. And what we're doing with the seminar and other things at the Digital Life Initiative is we're trying to share this knowledge and bring people to a level of knowledge that they're able to understand what's going on and sometimes participate in societal discussions, no matter where everybody is situated, and to have something important to say. As you know, the seminar involves roughly half guest speakers invited from outside of Cornell Tech, Cornell, and the Digital Life Initiative. And about half the speakers, as we've seen today, involve people who are part of the Digital Life Initiative as visitors, as research, postdoc research fellows, as visiting fellows, and as DLI doctoral fellows. We also have people who've been attending, and I guess this is one great advantage of being online and probably a lesson for the future, even when we do convene together in person, is we have a wonderful array of people who are joining us from all over the US, from all over the world, from maybe every continent, although I'm not going to go through the list right now to make sure, but nobody minds a bit of exaggeration. And I just want to mention, we have our Critical Reflections blog. We have students who are enrolled in the Digital Life Seminar for credit, and they have been taking notes at the different sessions, and they write up what the discussion was and post these in the Critical Reflections section of the Digital Life Initiative website. We have a Twitter handle, so please follow us. And if you are not on the mailing list to receive regular notices about the Digital Life Initiative and would like to be, there's an email that you can send to Michael and we'll add you to the list. The promise is the only thing you'll get from us are announcements of the Digital Life seminars. Occasionally we have workshops and conferences. You'll hear about those, and you will hear from us at our monthly, although we're late this month, because November was really a busy month, as we all know. So we do have a newsletter, and that's the only other thing. So before handing the floor over to the speakers, I wanted to acknowledge that we have several of our team, of our members, who are moving on. And I don't want to say to greener pastures, because nothing can be greener than where they are at the moment. But they're all going on to wonderful new arenas, and hopefully their time at DLI is preparing them well for that. Being a DLI fellow visitor, etc., is something like being president of the United States. You keep that for the entire rest of your life, and you get a free pass to attend any of our events. So folks, Lee, Ido, Yael, Songjeng, Yan, keep that in mind and come visit, attend, and on the other hand, we're very proud to see you go out and forge your own path and do fantastic things. So sweet, sad, and best of luck. Today, we're really lucky to have Robin Burjon. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Perfect. Okay. And Ido, who has been one of the Digital Life Initiative doctoral fellows. I'm letting you read the bios for a moment, and then I'm going to hand the floor over back to Michael, or to who goes first?
I think to Ido, I think, if I recall.
Yep.
All right, thanks. And welcome again, everybody. The way this goes is they will talk. Questions remain afterwards. We don't want you to have too active of a chat on the side, because sometimes it draws attention away from the presentations. But if you do have a question, sometimes it's helpful to list it, and when I moderate afterwards, I'll see if I can pick up some of those questions during the Q&A period. All right.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Welcome aboard, everybody. It's great to see everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I will take the advantage of being the speaker and thank Helen for this great postdoc period. It has been a wonderful, wonderful ride. So thank you so much. And as you can see, I chose some of my fancy clothes today to feel a bit more in presentation mode here in my basement. For the broader audience, I'll just say that I'm a social scientist using computer science, data science tools to study how policymakers, how private actors govern risks from digital technologies. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have this session as a joint session with Robin Burjon, who runs data governance at the New York Times. Now, the division of labor here is that I am responsible for presenting the dark present of AdTech in our privacy, of advertising in our privacy. And Robin is in fact our Robin Hood. So he will share with us how the New York Times fights back to safeguard the privacy of its readers in the advertising space, and also share with us super interesting conversations that are going on in the web standards community about possible future, maybe brighter future for our privacy in the advertising space. So here is our agenda. I will cover the first two parts, sharing with you two research projects. First is how the AdTech industry identifies users and why this is so troubling. And second, a project that aims to explain the unbelievable enforcement gap in the EU when it comes to digital advertising. Clearly, there are privacy violations that are not enforced, and the question is why. Robin will take it from there, share about New York Times practices in this space, and share with us possible future in this ecosystem. But before we start, let's level the playing field, and I'm going to present a brief 101 on digital advertising and tie the projects that will be discussed here to our understanding of this ecosystem. And the fundamental equation I want all of us to remember is that every time there is an ad space to fill in a website and an internet connection available, what we call real-time auction for an ad takes place. This happens every time a web page is loaded and takes less than 300 milliseconds. billions of online ads are placed on web page and mobile apps in this way every day. And the question is, okay, how this is actually working behind the scenes. So step one, page starts loading. You can see the ad slot at the top of the page. And like every market, this is a market of sellers and buyers. Now, back in the days, the two would directly connect each other, and sometimes they still do. But it's more likely that they will work together through a range of intermediaries with personal information flowing between actors to determine the best ad to show to the user. And just to understand the scale, I'm showing here a $1 bill, but in fact, bids for ads are just a couple of cents. And it's only what we call the super premium retargeted ads that are being bought for $1. These are the ads that are shown after you express an interest in a product. For instance, in Amazon.com, you go to a different website and see an advertisement for the exact same product. So these are the premium ads. So after a page starts loading, the ad slot requests an ad. What does that mean? It means that very basic information about the user is being sent out to a third party. Now, this can be directly to an ad exchange where the auction is actually taking place, or this can be facilitated through what we call SSP, a supply side platform. These are the guys who want to sell the space on behalf of the website at the highest possible rate and keep some of the money to themselves for their services. For our purposes, what matters is that basic user information, the IP address of the user, the URL of the website, and the ID of the user assigned through a cookie is being sent out to a third party in this second step. In the third step, bid request is sent out to advertisers. Now, remember that bid request, we will go back to that and see what actually this includes. But the ad exchange is actually broadcasting to any advertiser out there that wants to hear that there is an auction going on and you can go ahead and place your bids. There are two possible specifications for an ad exchange. One is called the Authorized Buyers Protocol ran by Google, and the other one is OpenRTB ran by IAB, the Advertising Industry Association. Now, for future slides, it's important to remember that Google is being held accountable in the EU by the Irish Privacy Watchdog, so in Ireland, and IAB, the Industry Association, is held accountable in Belgium. So the Belgian Privacy Watchdog here is on the spot. This is just how data protection in the EU works. A third important country is the UK, that Brexit has its own mandate to hold these firms accountable. So after a bid request is sent out, advertisers start to bid. They can do so directly to the ad exchange or through what we call DSP, demand side platforms that want to optimize the return of investment for advertisers and work on their behalf. Then what's happening is what we call cookie matching. So all the advertisers that are participating in the bid trying to see, okay, do we know this user? Have we seen this user before? What this user is interested in? And that's how they choose how much to place in their bid. And like any auction, the highest bidder will of course win. And in the final step, the winning ad, in this case, advertiser number 3 who offered 30 cents, he gets to show his advertisement and all of us are happy. But so far, this is a rather naive picture of how advertising works. And in fact, if you think about it, digital advertising could actually work this way, just based on this very basic information about the users. Advertisers could be satisfied by just recognizing, for instance, the current article that you are reading and delivering you an ad just based on that. This is what we call contextual advertising, right? So if you're reading an article about the US Open, you know, the tennis competition, you will get to see an ad for a tennis racket. This is all great. But in reality, the reality is quite, of course, different. And one thing I did not highlight on purpose is actually how advertisers choose the amount of money in each auction that takes place. And believe me, they go way, way beyond just basic information about the user. In fact, every arrow that you see in this diagram contains decisions that are based on rich profiles of users, based on data collection and aggregation over time. And this is happening through two main channels. The first is that each actor has its own pile of personal information about the user based on its history. I mentioned that briefly when I talked about cookie matching being conducted by advertisers. And second, and even more disturbing, is the use of data management platforms, DMPs. That's how they called by the industry. We will call them data brokers because this is what they do. And you have to understand these DMPs are everywhere. They are working across the board with each and every entity in this ecosystem to inform its decision, segment the audience, analyze information that was gathered about the user, not only in this auction, but based on previous auction, other online activities, and sometimes even offline activities. They are data brokers per se, relying on what we call third-party data. They're the backbone of data-driven marketing here, and they allow advertisers to gain unique insights into their potential customers. Some people even describe DMPs as the pipes of AdTech, right? They connect so many platforms so marketers can use their powerful audience data when and where they want. Examples for these companies are Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, Udemy. And you can see in this figure, they work with the website as a third party. They work with the SSP. They work with the ad exchange, right, to make the bid request much more attractive by including information such as demographic data, health-related data. Categories of information can include heart and cardiovascular diseases, mental health, sexual health, infectious diseases, reproductive health, substance abuse, health condition, politics, ethnics, identity groups, you name it. As user imagination here, they will use each and every attribute of personal information they got to target us for quote unquote, the best possible ad. So all the parties in this ecosystem augment the data collected with information from other sources, a process we call data, they call this process data enrichment. We will call this process privacy disaster. And as you can imagine, there are many angles that we can study and should be studying in this ecosystem, but most of this, as we can see, is not visible from the client side, from the user's browser, and it's happening on the server side. So in the project that I'm about to present, we chose to focus on what is visible from the client side. And this is the way third parties in websites, this can be the SSP, the ad exchange, or the DMPs, how they actually identify users across different websites. And it's not only me that telling you that identification in the industry is important for the industry. In a guide to the post third-party cookie era, the advertising industry defined advertising identifiers, calling them a key prerequisite to address a user for personalized and targeted advertising, since all user-centric data is associated with it. So this is key for their business model. And the question is how this actually works and why we should be worried. So to understand why identification gets ugly in the web from a privacy perspective, we need to zoom out and look at the web as what it is an array of different social contexts that come together. And by cross-identifying users in these contexts, we can learn a lot about their interest, when they can become vulnerable or receptive to certain advertisement. Because the truth is that we're never alone, right? Third parties are all over the web, even though we don't directly see them in our browser. On average, there are 9 trackers per page, 33 tracking requests per page. This is crazy. And different types of information seeking in the web, and this is what we argue, should be dealt by different privacy norms in each of the cases. So this cross-identification by third parties potentially changes the meaning of sensitive information, right? When records of browsing behavior are carried over into profiling in other contexts, then those attributes become even more sensitive. And that is why it's important to understand how advertisers actually identify user in these different browsing experiences. So this is what we wanted to measure. So the first question, okay, what actually did we measure? So first we look at previous empirical studies, realize that they're studying tracking in bulk, mostly within a website, but not across websites, even though different privacy norms should apply to different websites. And we're trying to apply a more context-sensitive analysis to online tracking, trying to compare persistent identification across different types of web information seeking practices by the user. So to visualize what we do, we inspect browsing, for instance, to webmd.com, health-related website. We identify a third party, doubleclick.net, and we see that this third party identified the user based on certain string. In this example, 1 to 9. And then we inspect a following browsing session to newyorktimes.com. We see again a third party, doubleclick.net, and we see the same user ID being used to identify the user. And here we have a proof of cross-identification by third parties in these two websites. So how did we measure this? We investigated the top popular 15 websites, home pages, and internal pages, overall 75 web pages, just to get a proof of concept and see if we can get something out of this context-sensitive approach. We looked at health, education, and news-related websites. These are the websites we were looking at, and you can see that we conducted repeated 6 experiments to make sure that what we see are not just trends in the data, but actually things that third parties persistently do between different types of websites. And to put a long story short, what did we find? We found that the difference in the types of websites really matter for trackers. Third of the studied third parties use persistent identifiers among all these 3 types of websites that were studied, but to a different degree. And maybe this is the most interesting finding. We saw that third-party trackers are more likely to persistently identify users following their visit to health-related websites. And this is not surprising. Usually when we browse health-related, this is sensitive information about us that can be revealed, and it's very appealing for advertisers to know where we came from to better target us in a certain auction, and of course, over time. Let's visualize what we found. So we created a graph and an edge between 2 websites in case the same ID cookie was used by a tracker that is present in both contexts. In this case, we have an edge between webmd.com and newyorktimes.com. If a tracker, in this case Twitter, uses the same identification in both websites, the edge becomes thicker if another third party joins the party and identify the user persistently as well, according to its terms. So this come out to this. We can see flows between websites, in this case, from health websites to news websites to education websites. We see how third-party trackers in news websites link user IDs from healthcare website, right? So you see the strong links between the green and the blue, potentially violating expected privacy norms of the users. Another visualization of another experiment show this even further. Here we go from health to education to news websites, and you see the dominance of persistent identification from healthcare website in green to the orange to education websites to the blue to the news website, but in different volumes. So we show here overall that what matters for users' privacy is not only the amount of tracking within a given type of website, but also the extent that these trackers link information about users between types of websites, between different contexts of the web. And we argue that this is a rather unaccounted privacy violation. And just to recap, this is all things the regulator is not even looking at. So the regulator is not holding these firms accountable for these practices, even though they're disturbing. But this made us ask, okay, what about enforcement over things that are clearly a violation of privacy, even under the current regulatory regime? This was the motivation in the second project and the next project that I'm about to present. And to understand the GDPR violation by the industry, we need to go back to our AdTech figure from the beginning and understand what are the GDPR violations that we're talking about. Now, I'm bringing up this figure again. It should be now less intimidating. We understand how this works and what's happening. And overall, there are 3 clear violations of the GDPR, the European Privacy Law, by this ecosystem. The first, maybe the most significant, is that there is no legal basis for this industry to process personal information. The only way to get a legal basis for that is to get a meaningful and explicit consent by the user, given the fact that personal information is central to this ecosystem. Other justification by the law for processing personal data do not apply in this case. And the current consent mechanisms are far from being explicit, and they're inappropriate to ensure GDPR compliance. So currently, according to the GDPR, there is no legal basis for processing personal information by the advertising industry. The second GDPR violation is violation of the transparency requirement. So according to GDPR, data controllers, those who process personal information, need to be transparent about what they actually do. But this figure and all this process makes it clear that we don't know which party will participate in the auction, since given the nature of the process, the owners of the website do not know who will collect the data, who will win the auction. So transparency is impossible in this case, or in the way this industry actually works. A third violation is violation of the security requirement. So the GDPR aims to protect the personal information that's being processed with clear security, data security requirements. But the broadcasting of personal information by ad exchange, these bid requests that we talked about, includes very, very sensitive information. And often they are not broadcast to a single entity or to a group of entities. The nature of this process leads to risk of data leakage. There are no guarantees or no technical controls about the processing of personal information by other parties, because so many intermediaries are involved here. Once data is out of the hand of one party, essentially that party has no way to guarantee what will happen to that data. And therefore, there's no way to ensure the security of that data. So all these are clear violations of the GDPR by the advertising industry. Now, it's not only me saying this. As you can see, 18 months ago, the UK privacy watchdog said that behavioral advertising is out of control exactly because of these 3 reasons. 18 months passed and we see 0 enforcement. Nothing happened when it comes to privacy enforcement. And the question and the puzzle is why? And when you start looking at this, you see that there are consistent gaps in the way GDPR is enforced, certainly in certain spaces, but especially when it comes to advertising. This is a law that passed 3 years ago. It was rightly celebrated, but when the law actually meets reality and being implemented, something is just not working. And again, this is a well-documented problem. And you can see here from these headlines that everyone understands that GDPR is not working when it actually meets reality. And to understand the sources of the problem, we need to look at the building blocks of the GDPR. And these are what we call the data protection authorities, the DPAs. These are the agencies, the watchdogs that need to hold these companies accountable. Now, the DPAs, each member state in the EU has its own DPA, its own privacy watchdog. This is an independent agency that supervises a variety of market actors, right? If you need to enforce privacy, almost each and every entity in the digital economy is a fair game, right? They all process personal information, and we need to supervise everyone. This is, of course, impossible task. These agencies became part of the legal framework in '95. Their powers were increased after GDPR in 2018, but at the end of the day, these entities have to carefully choose what cases to investigate, how to create deterrence, when to incentivize compliance. This is not an easy task. There's no question about it. And when we talk about advertisement, we're talking about UK, Ireland, and Belgium. They're on the spot. They're the ones who need to hold the advertising industry accountable because the way data protection in the EU, what we call the one-stop shop mechanism. So one country is responsible for each of those entities. Now, one common wisdom is that the problem of enforcement is a problem of resources, right? Without sufficient resources, the argument goes, DPAs are lacking the manpower and capacities to hold companies accountable. And take a look at this figure, right? You can see the disparity of resources between DPAs and the companies they're supposed to supervise. And this is alarming. And this might even deter DPAs from actually taking action. So even though most DPAs have benefited from increase in staff, from increase in resources, many of them still report back about the lack of sufficient resources. A famous image is this image. On the right-hand side, you can see what was a few years ago the Irish Data Protection Authority. It's not like that anymore, but just a few years ago, the Irish Data Protection Authority was in the size of a convenience store. This is unbelievable. But I'm trying to push back on this a little bit. I'm saying it's not all about resources because the UK, one of the most highly funded DPAs, have saying in recent questionnaire that they have the appropriate human, financial, and technical resources to enable it to fully discharge its regulatory responsibilities. Also, think about it, this radical asymmetries that you see in the budgets, between the budgets of DPAs and the entities they're supposed to regulate, they will always exist, right? We will never close that gap. But again, if you look at what DPAs are doing, several DPAs with smaller budget are effectively posing fines post GDPR, and therefore resources alone do not tell us the whole story. There's something else going on here. A second common wisdom is, wait a minute, this is a problem of technical expertise. These DPAs have not enough expertise to hold these firms accountable. There's a famous saying by David Flaherty that one cannot regulate a system without fully understanding it. And this makes sense. You can see here in the report from Brave that the number of technical experts out of the total number of staff in each DPA is quite small, right? So in red, you see the tech specialist. In gray, you see the total manpower for each country. And the report shows that half of the DPA have less than 5 tech specialists on board, concluding that they have no capacities to comprehend and enforce GDPR in rather sophisticated scenarios like those surfaced by the advertising ecosystem. But again, I'm trying to push back on this as well. I'm saying it's not the whole story. The UK is the authority with the most technical resource in terms that it have in-house tech experts, and they claim that tech expertise is not a barrier for their investigation and enforcement process. The Belgian authority, another key authority in the advertising ecospace, said that they have outsourced experts and it relies on outsourcing for gathering evidence, for conserving digital proof. So 2 of the 3 DPAs do not say they have any expertise problem when it comes to enforcement. So what we say is that the lack of enforcement is also a problem of enforcement styles. And when I say enforcement styles, I mean the degree to which relevant authorities seek to ensure compliance and bring those responsible of non-compliance into line. So very straightforward. And I'm trying to investigate, okay, so how DPA's enforcement style have developed in the post-GDPR era, right? What enforcement styles do we see out there? And how the framework of enforcement styles can explain lack of enforcement in the AdTech case. So we have collected data from many sources, from private law firms, the annual reports of DPAs, websites of DPAs, websites of EU authorities, and came up with this visualization of the data. On the x-axis, you can see the number of fines by each DPA, and on the y-axis, you can see the budget of each DPA. And the first thing we wanted to check is the correlation between number of fines and budget, and number of fines and number of experts. And you can see high levels of correlation. They are both super significant. So indeed, resources and expertise are central to what's happening here. But try to look closely at this graph. And you can see, for instance, this cluster. You can see Cyprus, Romania, Malta, Latvia. They impose relatively high number of fines, almost 30 on average, compared to their budget, which is 680,000 euros. On the other hand, you have this cluster. You have the UK, Ireland, Luxembourg. They impose very low number of fines, less than 2 on average, compared to their budget, which is more than 24 million euros. And it just doesn't make sense. You can see that the size of the circle is also matters. We try to see what percentage of fines are from the total complaints. So Malta is definitely an outlier, turning 17% of received complaints into fine. Cyprus and Belgium are also high on that scale. But again, Luxembourg, Ireland, UK, they're at the other end of that spectrum, turning only 0.01% of complaints into fines. Finally, on this graph, you can see the label of big tech. So France, Belgium, Sweden, these are all DPAs that were actually able to hold big tech accountable, in this case, Google. It means that they have the mechanisms and the guts, if you will, to go after big tech, even though there are significant differences in the budget. And next, we will dig deeper to comparatively investigate the enforcement style of the British and the Belgian DPA. I wish we could do so for Ireland as well, but there's no data about what actually they're doing and how they actually investigate. And this is quite troubling. The EU Parliament is about to pass a resolution that will require Ireland to publish more data for researchers and for society. So far we can only look into what the UK and the Belgium are doing and what is their style and what can we say about the future of enforcement in the AdTech case. So to understand enforcement styles, first we need to build a typology. So we looked at the literature. We see that enforcement styles run on 2 dimensions. First is the level of formalism. So how the agency interact with the law, how formal the agency is when imposing the law. And the second is the level of hierarchy, how the agency interact with the regulated entity. And the combination of these 2 dimensions yields 4 types of enforcement style. You can have a passive style, persuasive style, insistent, and authoritative style. So having this typology in mind, we try to apply that to the data protection space. And we built a scale. We built a scale of indicators about how complete is the check and the inspection, how substantial is the check, what is the sanctioning approach, and how the agency actually interact with the data controller, with the regulated entity. And each of these indicators relate to either the level of formalism of the agency or the level of hierarchy of the agency. So again, to put a long story short, we measured based on dozens of investigative reports by the Belgium and the UK authorities, and we ended up with 2 distinct enforcement styles that emerged. We see that the UK is following what we call a rather cooperative legalism style, a very formal but cooperative and non-hierarchical enforcement style vis-a-vis companies. The Belgian DPA, however, with medium levels of hierarchy and formalism, is following an insistent enforcement style, a much more pragmatic approach with limited tolerance by the regulator if regulated entities are out of line. So final slide of this project to conclude, we see first that enforcement strategies vary way beyond questions of resources and expertise. Like I said, DPAs have to strategically choose how to invest their resources and decide when to create deterrence, when to provide incentives, with the fundamental understanding that not every violation could realistically be investigated. We see that enforcement style explain actually the lack of enforcement in the UK case. We see the UK DPA seeks cooperation and non-coercive solutions to the problem. So real enforcement, unfortunately, is not on the horizon. On the other hand, we see that in the Belgian approach, which is much more hierarchical with a history of going against big tech, we can be optimistic that enforcement is on the horizon. For future research, we're trying to explain these differences, and we need to look at different data protection cultures in these nations and different level of independence of the DPA in each state that maybe limit the way they can actually operate against the tech companies. But maybe the take-home message of this project is that the goal of the GDPR was to resolve the fragmented nature of previous privacy laws in the EU that were already embedded in different national systems. But in practice, what we see is that very different enforcement styles persist and actually impact data protection levels across the Union. So this concludes this project. And now over to you, Robin. Please inject some optimism to this conversation.
I will try. Thank you. Thank you very much. So hang on, let me start sharing so that we can switch straight to the presentation. And this is a test of my computer using skills. Okay, can everyone see the slides? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me as part of this session. My name is Robin Burgeon. I run data governance at the New York Times. And I'm going to look today at whether it's possible to make ads good, what the Times has tried to do to incrementally get to that place, and what's happening in the broader ecosystem that can drive us to hopefully a better place compared to the dumpster fire that that we currently have to deal with. So, before we jump in, I'd like you to take a deep breath because some of this is counterintuitive. But one of the premises I'd like to start from is that it's possible that advertising, digital advertising, might not be evil, or at least there is a possible world in which it isn't. I know you've heard a million excuses for all the bad things that the ad tech people do. And the problem is some of those excuses are actually real. Do they justify all the bad things? Absolutely not. But there's a work that I feel we need to do, which is to precisely separate, the good goals from the terrible implementation, and try to move past the absolutely justified anger at the, again, dumpster fire that is digital advertising today, and see if instead of burning everything to the ground, there's something that we can figure out to make it work well. As part of this view, there's just a very few, and this is, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this slide. I'm sorry, it's pretty text heavy, but there's a few concepts that I think are part of the worldview that I'm trying to approach this problem with. And that I think are important to understand whether you agree or not before jumping into the rest. The first is, I think ads are not necessarily manipulative. In the same way that privacy is not secrecy, you're not locked up in a box with no information going out. Autonomy is also not a state of like zero influence from the external world. So it's possible to receive some information, some influence that isn't manipulative, and that can actually be good. It's also possible that it is unethical to not show an ad. And the classic case here is discrimination in a variety of contexts. So for instance, if you decide to not show a specific group of people some lending or housing or job ads, then you could be discriminating against them. So it's not always a case that fewer ads is better. And also the response to that might be, let's not target, let's just do contextual. But of course, contextual can be a very, very strong proxy for various populations. The different types of content are not read or accessed by the same populations, and therefore you can use this as a proxy, and marketers absolutely do. The other side that I think is also worth thinking about is I like to try to think of something that we might want to call the attention commons, because I see a lot of the problems we talk about in terms of what's happening in the attention economy today tend to be approached to more of an individualistic frame, and we'll be talking about like addiction and things like that, but there are actually collective issues from that. Disinformation of one person or one person by one person might not be such a huge deal, but disinformation of a whole group, of a whole country, can actually have very detrimental effects. And so, trying to think in terms of, as this attention commons as, all that we collectively have in the public sphere and all that we pay attention to, all that gets recommended and promoted and surfaced in the sphere, and trying to approach this with a more of a collective framing. And if you start from if you start with that, then you can think of advertising as sort of a tax on this attention commons that can then be reinvested into improving the commons overall. And so this is actually quite important, because if you remove advertising, some things that are considered public goods, like good news, well-informed polity, actually become prohibitively expensive. And so, with that in mind, if you assume that advertising might be some sort of taxation on the attention commons that can help improve this commons, then you actually really want advertising to be effective. In the same way that you would want your tax money to be effective. So this, I'm trying to approach from this frame, which is sort of how can we make this idea of advertising good? Now, of course, don't get me wrong. When I said dumpster fire, I absolutely meant dumpster fire. I'm not going to dig into, the deep details of everything that's wrong. I think, you're certainly aware of at least some of the problems. Say there's pervasive surveillance. There's so much fraud. No one can even agree on how much fraud there is in the advertising system. It's just a hugely fraudulent scheme. Lots of malvertising. No one has any idea where the money's going. There was a huge group of major brands and major publishers got together to try to figure out, when some of them buy ads in the programmatic market and the others show them, this is a hugely resourced group. They couldn't track down 15% of the money. And this is like for really premium stuff. So that money is just like going God knows where. And the parts they could track down didn't, mostly go to the press. They went to all kinds of weird intermediaries in the AdTech system that it's not entirely clear what they do or if they bring any value. There's also a complete financialization of the AdTech system. This whole like bidding system that was introduced in the previous presentation. It actually works a lot like a high-speed electronic market. And it's showing signs of functioning like a bubble that might burst at some point, with pretty detrimental effects for those who make a living from this. It's also unsustainable. Half the newsroom jobs have disappeared in the US over the past 15 years, and there's a whole lot of other problems from dataification. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with most of them. So, when I usually discuss, what the Times is doing about this, I get a lot of why can't you just X questions, and so I just want to go through those very quickly so that we can move them out of the way and dive into the problems and what we've done. So we can't eliminate programmatic right away, at least not at a social scale. The Times maybe could, but it would be expensive. But a lot of newspapers out there have 95+% of their revenue from programmatic. And they're already struggling with that. So it would be impossible to remove it. Can we get rid of trackers? It's very difficult to do so. The problem is there are things that those pieces of technology do that are legitimate and that render advertising more efficient. And the thing is, they use exactly the same mechanics as the things that are not legitimate and that have problems. And so it's very difficult to build a system that removes one but keeps the other. Could we just do contextual? Currently, not in the competitive market. If we did only contextual, the money would simply shift to people who do personal tracking, because that's what marketers are asking for. So it would have to be a worldwide change at once. Same thing, is it possible, instead of having this whole third-party ecosystem where everyone's tracking and everyone's building these databases and everyone's trying to exploit them, would it be possible to move all of that into first party? So, the Times we can, and we have. But a lot of those small publishers, especially local news, simply don't have the scale to do that kind of thing. And so they would find themselves at a disadvantage. And the world in which everything is first party is a world in which you have only large players, which might not be the best outcome for everyone. Could we rely only on subscriptions? Yeah, absolutely fine if you think only rich people should have access to news. And could we make subscriptions ad-free? Well, again, I'm not allowed to give you an exact number, but suffice it to say that if we removed ads for subscribers, the subscription would have to be a lot more expensive, like substantially more expensive. And again, we'd be restricting access to only pretty wealthy people at this stage. So, in terms of instead of, I'm going to stop talking about what we can't do, and I'm now going to move on to what we've done and why we've done it. Just to give you a sense of the fact that it is possible to change this, and then we can look at the future and where this whole ecosystem might go if we work towards it properly. So the starting point for us really is that, and it seems obvious when you pause to think about it, but the trust of our readers is absolutely essential. And it's always been essential, but there's very much a crisis of trust in news nowadays. And the thing is, it's very hard to ask someone to trust news if it's not delivered by a trustworthy organization. So, even if your reporters are doing a stellar job of bringing really trustworthy information to people, if the organization that publishes, the context in which this is published, are not themselves trustworthy, then people are going to start doubting, even the validity of the reporter's work, even if they have nothing to do with these trackers. And obviously, we can't retain people's trust if we're betraying their privacy. And we've surveyed our readers. The results are extremely clear. They 9 out of 10 don't want their data shared or sold for ads. Most of them feel they've lost control. And a lot of things, something that publishers often say, which isn't true at all, is that if they are trustworthy themselves and they pick third parties, if they handpick third parties, then that trust should be transitive. It's not. Our readers absolutely trust us, but they don't trust whoever we pick as third parties. And I think that's an important cue, that we should listen to and go like, okay, so we might want to take that seriously. So, what does it look like when the Times decides to take privacy seriously? One thing, the very first step is to stop treating it as something that's nice to do, because everyone's like, oh yeah, if we could make that work, that would be really nice, right? It would be nice. Okay, well, let's talk about it next year. Let's see if we can change something. Instead of that, we try to make it like really, really core to our data strategy. And this is a strategy that's gone to senior leadership, approved by the board, etc. It's absolutely part of how we work now. I've written about it at greater length. So if you follow this link, you can read more later. I can share the link again afterwards. But basically the 3 objectives, and these are business objectives on purpose, basically, to frame it as something that it is what the business does. One, we want to be the sole controllers of any data collected on the page. And we mean this as GDPR data controllers, which is to say that we might work with third parties because that's how technology works. You plug in services from third parties, but they are not allowed independent control of the data. We do ethical sourcing, and I know that sounds sort of like farm to table kind of organic approach to data, but it really is what it is. It's like when we do ad targeting on our site, we want it to be using information that we specifically asked the people to provide us specifically for advertising purposes. They said yes. We process it in ways that we've reviewed, over and over again to make sure that they're not discriminatory, that we don't feel that there are like strong issue or any issues with it. And we really try to use it that way. And also, this sort of a test of appropriateness that we use, which is, would we be comfortable sitting down with one of our readers and explaining what we're doing? And we really want that to work. So, but these are principles, you've seen businesses before tell you we have these great principles. What does it look like in practice?
No, we have to.
I'm sorry, I think there's someone speaking.
Because you're opening on the 19th.
Oh, gonna mute.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So what does it look like when we put it to work? And I'm not going to go, this is 3 years of work for an entire team. I'm not going to go into great detail. If you have specific questions, by all means, ask them later. But first, we removed a lot of marketing trackers. If you look, this is a before-after diagram. And so on the left, it's what used to happen when you loaded one page of the New York Times. Every single dot in there is a request to some kind of other party. Some of them are internal to the Times, but most of them, as you can see, this is this sprawling ecosystem where everyone gets to see some data. And so we made this rule that we really want only third parties that are data processors, therefore they work for us and the data stays with us, so that we are sole controllers. And when you apply sole controllership, it actually moves to the diagram on the right, which is the same page being loaded nowadays with far fewer trackers. So as you can see, there's still some third parties involved. We're getting rid of several of them very soon. So in the top right, you'll see Bluekai, that's going away. Google Tag Manager is probably going away at some point. So we're removing these one by one, but we've already made quite a major shift. And the thing that's important, from a business standpoint here is to understand why those trackers were there. People put trackers on their own site. I'm not talking about in advertising. I'm talking on the site directly in order to market to people. So basically, you'll come and visit the Times. You're not a subscriber. All these million trackers will fire up. And that way we can recognize you in other contexts and try to target you for subscriptions. This is very important for subscription-based businesses, which we are. And so the marketing team really wanted to keep those trackers around. So it was a long and difficult process to get to agreement and figure out how we could do this safely without losing our ability to acquire new subscribers. And this this was produced with a lot of testing, a lot of thinking, a lot of reviewing what worked, what didn't work, what could we remove, what could we negotiate with these third parties. And, it was scary for marketing, but we did it. And we're now at 7 million subscribers. I think we've grown 2 or 3 million subscribers since making this change. So this is a proof that it's possible to do effective marketing without all that tracking. Another thing we've done, which is, I thought it would have a smaller effect, but the feedback from readers has actually been very, very positive, which is we've rewritten our privacy policy in such a way that it's meant to be read by actual people. And this was a very interesting exercise. What happened is the New York Times opinion section published this article in which they used an automated system to rate the readability of various companies' privacy policies. And of course they included ours because they like to hold us to account as well. And we rated worse than Facebook and very close to Kat's first critique. The article didn't say if it was the critique in the original German, but it was bad either way. So what we did is we sat down with a lawyer and a creative writer, someone whose job it is to render things understandable, and we spent a lot of time rewriting this privacy policy. It's not perfect, it's still a privacy policy. It's still probably too long, but people have spontaneously written in to say, hey, I went to your privacy policy and I actually read it. And so I think this is something worth thinking about, that people actually will be happy that they can read about what you're doing. Another thing, and this is, I'll go over this quickly, but it's internally, we've built everything with the assumption that we're driving towards greater privacy. And so we have this system called the Privacy API. That's why there's a cat. It's because the acronym is PUR. This privacy system basically drives every single product. So, like many media companies, we have, 60, 70 for user-facing products. They all work in different ways. And we want to make sure that we're not just focusing on nytimes.com or just one corner of the thing, but we're making things better across the board. And so we've built everything as a platform that supports privacy. And since we also try to manage data as a platform, that means that we can minimize data collection across the board. We can apply limited retention rules across the board, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is really to build this into the fabric of the technology that we use. We've also been innovating in advertising and trying to shift the way in which we carry advertising. So the reason there's a crying, sad robot is because we've removed programmatic as much as we believe we can. So for instance, in Europe, there's no programmatic anymore. In our iOS apps, there's no programmatic anymore. And we're progressively, actually, I think in neither app there's programmatic left now. And so we're progressively removing it when we feel that the business can sustain it and that we can replace it with healthier advertising practices. But it's not, innovating in advertising is not just figuring out ways of removing stuff, it's also adding new capabilities. And so we've done a fair bit of work on building up better contextual infrastructure. There's this thing called fields. So that's why you have these few feelings in the corner. And the idea here is not to analyze users, but to analyze content and to see what kind of sentiment, given piece of content might elicit, and then to provide that as a targeting parameter for advertising. And it turns out, and this shouldn't be really surprising for anyone who's thought about, context, why would context work as an advertising targeting method? But really, if, for instance, you have an article that elicits a sentiment of adventurousness, and you want to, market, say, some hiking gear brand, well, those two actually work really well together, and we're seeing very strong results in the output. And though also at the bottom, you'll see a party, and that is because we are doing first-party data. I'm sorry, this is the best illustration I could get. And the idea there is that instead of using all these systems that send your data, broadcast it to 200 third parties, then allow them to do whatever it is they're doing, and then sell that back to advertisers who target on our site, we do that ourselves, and we do it in a way that, again, we feel is ethical, respectful of users. We absolutely limit the kind of demographics and interests that can be targeted, and we limit how they can be used by advertisers. We've also, as a company, been a driving force in something called GPC, which is a way of for browsers to make websites more privacy friendly. And I'll go through this quickly because I see time is flying. And we've also developed an internal equivalent to an IRB, which is slightly different. We call it an ORB because it makes for a better acronym, and also it works slightly differently. But basically, the idea is that we do have an area in which we review data practices on a very regular basis. And so, as part of that, we do use contextual integrity. I wanted to mention this. This is actually a slide that I've actually lifted straight from internal training. I won't go into great details because you all know what this is. But basically, this is sort of how we approach training people to understand privacy. And the value we really see in using this approach and framework is also that it helps people break down situations in a way that they feel they can understand and they feel they can improve them. Because when I started working on this, everyone was like, oh my God, we're doing tracking. It's terrible. We need to stop all of it, but then we'll have no money. So, then we need to do all of it. And, the idea was to really provide people with the intellectual tools that they can have this incremental approach to improving the way in which we approach privacy. And so this is ruthlessly operational. So it's probably all kinds of wrongs, but that's how we use it. And so, this is an example of things that people can feel they can tweak, before, after, to improve the privacy of our readers. And in general, the notion of context is one that I found to be very useful in explaining, especially to the advertising group who are big fans of this, how to approach this problem. The digital environment is very new. It's very confusing. There's no cue of context. People have no gut feeling for what's appropriate. It's very weird. People really don't know what to do. But if we start, shifting that to thinking of visiting the Times is sort of like visiting a shop. And, if you enter a shop wearing masks like these guys, people are not gonna, I don't mean today's kind of mask, I mean those kinds of masks, right? People might kind of freak out. And so you can think of it in the same way that when you visit a shop, you're not anonymous, you're being recognized, but people don't know everything about you either. And, you can think of like, maybe there's fraud prevention, so maybe there's CCTV, but it has specific parameters such that, there's only 24-hour retention, it doesn't leave the building, et cetera, et cetera. And so grounding this in like real world contexts, I found helps people, map out the ethics of what they do without having to call in an external ethicist, which, we don't tend to do that much. And so, and sorry, I'm going really fast, but what is happening? So beyond the Times, we're at a juncture in time when things are happening and things are changing, and there's entirely the possibility that we can bring about a better digital ecosystem. And so very quickly, browsers have tightened up data protection quite a lot. Third-party cookies are probably disappearing. The IDFA is going away, which is the identifier that apps used on iOS. And so, the entire industry is currently like running around with its head on fire, screaming, oh my God, what's going to happen? And this is a great time for reinvention. And so, currently the priority of constituencies in AdTech is very much, intermediaries, then brands, then publishers, then users. I think we can flip this around. And the way in which we're working towards flipping this around is through the W3C. The W3C is a standards organization. It's exactly as boring as you think it is, but it's also, a stalwart of good tech that has like shepherded the web to where it is today, which is like not perfect, but still a strong technical system. And a lot of the work to define what privacy should be like in the digital world and what advertising should be like in the digital world has shifted there. And so, we are participating there. I think others should participate. I mean, quite a few people are participating there. And we are rediscovering things like maybe technology could be biased for good. Some crazy ideas like that, where we're starting to rediscuss the basics of advertising and of tracking and of personal data online. And this is not perfect. It's a form of private governance, but it can really help foster a better environment. And in doing that, I'm currently working on some proposals that, it's a longer shot, but what, the real question, and it's actually possible to ask that question now. It wasn't possible to ask it 3 years ago. How would we build digital advertising if we built it from scratch today? And I think if we can answer that question in a useful and, powerful and implementable way, then this is a good time to make it happen. Thank you. And I'm sorry I had to go quickly at the end, but trying to make time.
All right, so thank you both for incredible presentations. We normally end at 1:15. That's the ending time. So what I'm thinking is, if people we wouldn't conduct this as like a Q&A because there really may not be time for the A part. But if there are folks who would like to, we do the hand raise. I'll just call on you, and if you can be really brief with a question, that would be awesome. Hopefully they'll be helpful for Robin and Idor, who just fabulous talks. Okay, Meg.
Thank you for the fantastic talks. Briefly, I'm Meg, I'm a postdoc. Ido, I'd be interested to hear if any of your analysis involved looking at tech sectors in a country and how it influenced potentially capture or some persuasion for the regulators to try to treat them with kid gloves. And Robin, I was really interested in your comparison to advertisers as taxes, and considering that for a single impression, it's only fractions of a cent. I'd like to know more about a model in which rather than access or no access, we might pay into a bank and get a little bit of access. You know, if I paid $10, I could thousands and thousands of articles actually. So I wasn't so convinced by that metaphor. Thank you.
Okay, Julie, quick, all very quick. Unmute.
Thank you, thank you. Ido, I will reserve my meaty remarks for the Twitter feed at DLI, but I just want to say, Ido, your presentation, and I hope this doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, but it was the best of 2020 for the Digital Life Seminar. And I'm telling you that now, and I'll say it again publicly on Twitter, because that is my microphone. Jack and I have a problem, and I'm going to use Twitter until he shaves that horrendous beard. But I digress. The other thing I want to say is, Dr. Nissenbaum, in this season of light, may everyone have a better 2021. My menorah is right over there. I'm all set to light it. And when that happens, the Maccabees are going to be like dancing in my room here. So thank you so much for your hospitality and leadership. You are spectacular. Back to Ido. I'll get back to you on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Julie. Great to have you with us. Lee.
Thanks, guys. I'll try to be quick. I just want to say with respect to Robin's talk, this might be like a non-starter for the New York Times, but if you're really serious about thinking through all the problems and the implications following from the sorts of things you introduced, you should consider that the problem isn't ad tech, but advertising. Just about all of the inventory of problems you listed could be traced back decades in terms of the whole model of commercial support. And so if the idea is that the information provided by publications like the New York Times is so important to public life that it needs to be less mediated by commercial concerns that are invading our privacy and so on, it needs to be a bigger project. And so if you're going to put in all this muscle, let's go top to bottom.
Great. Elettra, there was somebody else, but maybe, okay, Elettra, you'll maybe have to be the last question.
Hello, thanks so much for these presentations, really interesting and very rich. I have a question for Ido. So I find your project very interesting. I really like your kind of multi-jurisdictional approach and kind of comparative approach. So I think it's great. I guess my question is, you kind of operate on the premise that GDPR is being violated by the AdTech ecosystem, and that what is needed is enforcement, greater enforcement, perfect enforcement, whatever that means. And I wonder whether you might be giving a little bit too much credit to GDPR, and whether, you know, in the ideal world where every authority in Europe is actually enforcing GDPR adequately, would that be the ideal situation? Would that really address the harms that the AdTech ecosystem is currently perpetrating? for internet users.
All right, guys. I mean, normally I give our speakers great questions, and thank you so much. And I hate to be rushing off like this, but I'm just going to say our speakers might have to just, ruminate on those questions, because we'll be ending the session. And let me just also echo Julie and say I think it's been an amazing season given the situation, and I really appreciate everybody who shows up, asks questions, listens. It's awesome, and I'm recognizing names, and I hope that we'll see you again in the spring. We're busy arranging, and hopefully it'll be as good of a season next spring, and we look forward to seeing you all. Michael, did I forget? I do actually, that reminds me, I did not thank Michael for his incredible work in just making sure that this season is run perfectly well. Thanks, Michael.
It's team DLI. Yeah.
And thank you so much, Ido and Robin. This was a stunning session. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.